Hello and welcome to Channels Book Club. My name is Olakunle Kasumu, and it's great to be on this show where we discuss all things books. Controversial books have a way of catching our attention. When a book is controversial, we just want to find out what's in there. What are people talking about? And 2025, what a year it has been as far as controversial books are concerned. It all started with Dele Farotimi's book, Nigeria and its Criminal Justice System. That book is still being discussed till now. And then, fast forward, former head of state, General Ibrahim Babangida, released his autobiography, A Journey in Service. And explode is an understatement. Everybody is talking about General Babangida's book, the media, events, small gatherings, family gatherings, friends, WhatsApp groups, social media. Everybody is talking about General Babangida's book. Well, not surprising, because he was the head of state when Nigeria had the June 12, 1993 election. Perhaps the most important political event in Nigeria's modern history. So, while Babangida wrote about so many things, and I have to tell you, those are things that we need to read. This book is just interesting. No matter what you think about Babangida, whether you like him or you don't like him, whatever it is, just entirely from a literary perspective, it's just an interesting book to read. And of course, like I always say to people, read and then form your own opinion. Read with your mind. Don't just take in whatever you read. Form your own opinion. So I find this very interesting, partly because I was old enough to know the events of 1993, prior to then, and so on. But let's dig in. So many interesting chapters here. But the chapter on June 12 is the one everybody has been talking about. It's natural. If you pick up this book, you probably will go to the story on June 12 before you start reading other stories. That's what I did. It was later on I started reading other stories and I said, oh, this book has a lot more than the June 12 story. It does have a lot more than the June 12 story. But what did Babangida write as far as the June 12 election is concerned? We're going to be digging into this. We're going to be exploring this book on this show in an upcoming episode. But for now, let's dig in a little bit into that June 12 story and just one aspect of it. Who was the antagonist of June 12, 1993, as far as Babangida is concerned? The chief antagonist of the June 12, 1993 election annulment in this book is no other person than the late General Sani Abacha. Now, if you read the chapter on June 12 here, and which, by the way, this book has 5 parts and 13 chapters, and the chapter we're talking about is titled Transition to Civil Rule and the June 12 Saga. That's chapter 12. That's what we're talking about. So in this chapter, Babangida describes the events before the cancellation of the election, and so interesting. All the intrigues, all the schemings of politicians and all that. He described everything, all the efforts they had made in putting the election together. He described everything from his own perspective. I'm sure a lot of people will argue that, oh, that's not correct, that's not true, and all that. But we're focused on Babangida's perspective here because this is his book. Now, there were 3 events that were key to the cancellation of the June 12 election, according to Babangida. First, the emergence of a group called ABN, Association for Better Nigeria, led by a gentleman called Arthur Nzeribe. So on June 10, 1993, they secured an injunction to suspend the election that was scheduled for June 12. That was the first big drama, according to Babangida, in his book. That threw everything off balance. Everything just went chaotic from then on. Then the second event was June 11th. There was an NDSC meeting on Friday, June 11th, where the cancellation on June 10, the suspension of the election by an Abuja High Court on June 10 was discussed. And at that meeting, everything went crazy. Babangida knew then that Nigeria was in trouble. He was in trouble. Everybody was in trouble. He knew then. According to Babangida, the NDSC meeting on Friday, June 11, only hours before the scheduled elections, was one of the stormiest meetings I ever conducted as president. Strangely, the Attorney General and Justice Minister, Akpangbo, who was the nation's chief law officer and who ought to know that the Justice Ikpeme court order violated an extant law, advised that the elections be postponed in compliance with the Abuja court order. And then the next thing that happened, the next key thing, was June 16, when there was an announcement that the vote count was suspended. Now, according to Babangida, he knew nothing about it. He just heard about it, almost like anybody else. It was some kind of scheme. He was skeeved out of everything, and he heard about the cancellation, the suspension of vote counts like anybody else. And then we all know what happened next. The election was annulled.
It is true that the presidential election was generally seen to be free, fair, and peaceful. However, there was in fact a huge array of electoral malpractices virtually in all the states of the Federation.
I could not imagine that the purported transgressions of the judiciary could possibly be used as the excuse for cancelling the election of June 12. You all knew how much risk, personal risk, financial risk, emotional involvement it has been for all the candidates, even the press, who had to cover it. Yes. Does anybody have the right to tear all that away? No. Absolutely no.
Now, so we're back to General Abacha here. And it reads, the argument went on for hours in a tense atmosphere, peopled by some who wanted the elections postponed. Among them, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Sani Abacha, Lieutenant General Joshua Dogonyaro, and a few service chiefs. So it's clear here. So the other page where he mentions General Sani Abacha is page 275. So let's read an excerpt there. Yes, during the stalemate that followed the termination of the results announcement, the possibility of annulment that could lead to fresh elections was loosely broached in passing. And that tells you that they did discuss the annulments, but according to Babangida, they didn't agree. Some people came up with the idea, it was discussed, but there was no agreement. But annulment was only a component of a series of other options. There were other options apart from annulment. But to suddenly have an announcement made without my authority was, to put it mildly, alarming. I remember saying, these nefarious inside forces opposed to the elections have outflanked me. I would later find out that the forces led by General Sani Abacha annulled the elections. So there goes again. Abacha found guilty again, according to Babangida. Now, if you go to page 277, in page 277, Babangida alleges that Abacha plotted his death. Abacha and some other soldiers plotted to kill him. In page 277, it reads somewhere there, it was painful for me to discover later that apart from Abacha, some of my closest colleagues, particularly a lieutenant general, were knee-deep in the plot to eliminate me. The only reason those disparate forces did not strike against me was that it was feared, and rightly so, that since I still enjoy the support of a sizable proportion of the armed forces, any attack on the government or my person would lead to a bloodbath. Okay, so in the first instance, in page 273, Babangida alleges that Abacha opposed June 12 election going on. In page 275, he said he was one of those who led its annulment. And then in page 277, he tried to eliminate him being IBB. Okay, so on and on, if you go through this book, Abacha is just the chief antagonist of the June 12 election annulment as far as Ibrahim Babangida is concerned. But he did take responsibility, in fairness. If you read certain pages, he said very clearly that he was taking responsibility. But we call him Maradona. Yeah, he takes responsibility on the one hand. On the other hand, he explains what happened, and he's not to be blamed when you read his explanation of what happened. So maybe that is the dilemma leaders have to, experience or carry on their heads or go through. So very soon, we are going to explore this book fully, bring in a guest, and just discuss Babangida's autobiography, A Journey in Service. So you might want to look out for that. But what a year it has been. Chief Edwin Clark passed away, and Chief Ayo Adebanjo also passed away. Good thing about those gentlemen is they wrote their autobiographies, and both autobiographies are quite explosive. And Babangida has written his. More people need to tell their stories. It will be great to get an autobiography, for example, from General Yakubu Gowon. It would be great to read the story of the Civil War from his own perspective. And so many other people out there ought to tell their stories. It's important to tell all these stories and preserve them. Very, very important. From the generals and the politicians and presidents, well, let's get back to what you might call literary fiction. The Nigeria Prize for Literature is on, the biggest prize in Africa. So all you writers out there who write prose, get ready because the big one is on again. Send your entries in. You might just be the winner of $100,000. How much is that these days? That's a lot of money. Well, it's on again, the Nigeria Prize for Literature. It's prose this year. Remember, the cycle is children's literature, poetry, drama, prose. It's prose this year, so all you prose writers, get out there, compete. You might just win the big prize.
Hello, I'm Kehinde Fadikpe, the author of In Such Tremendous Heat, a contemporary fiction novel about 3 Nigerian women living in Singapore. I was inspired to write this novel by the different Nigerian women I was meeting in Asia who came together to form a community despite us being very different and from different backgrounds and different walks of life. So I'm going to read from the opening chapter, which starts from the perspective of one of 3 women, Dara. She's a lawyer, she's very ambitious, and she gets drawn into an office rivalry with Lani, a Nigerian man who moves to Singapore and who becomes the source of a lot of conflict between the 3 main characters. Beneath the Singapore Cricket Club veranda, Dara watched 2 teams of lawyers sweat it out in the annual law rugby tournament held every January and allowed herself a small, happy sigh. Under the cool shade, she felt some mild pity for the poor bastards playing under the sun's sticky glare, but suffering in the heat never lasted long in Singapore. Discomfort was always reliably suspended in the blue or yellow taxis that swarmed the city, or through the icy gusts that rushed onto the streets from the malls. It was like a contract signed as a basic human right. You shall never perspire for long. Dara sat at the top of the stand beside Lucy, a junior associate on her team and one of the new trainees. It was a good vantage point from which to keep an eye on her boss, Ian, as he entertained 2 of his most important Japanese clients at the bottom of the steps. She would be ready whenever he caught her eye and gave her the green light to approach. In the meantime, she tried to feign interest in the losing team in green, which was made up of amateur and semi-professional players from her firm, Morgan Corbett Shaw. She'd given up checking her phone to see if her best friend Amaka would make an appearance. Even though Amaka's bank was helping to sponsor the tournament, she somehow always found a way to avoid these work events, something Dara just couldn't afford to do. Giving up a Sunday would be worth it though. Dara felt as confident as Perseus with the Gorgon's head in his bag, being so close to the partnership she'd spent the past 6 years working for. Work was going so well that it didn't matter that she was experiencing caffeine withdrawals from missing her hourly fix, or that she was being forced to give up a much-needed day of rest. She usually wasn't in the city much at the weekend. She traveled every chance she got, taking advantage of Singapore's many public holidays, a welcome byproduct of a country that officially celebrated 3 different religions. The past Christmas break had been spent cycling on her own in Laos, a wonderful change from the year before, when she'd celebrated with friends of friends who, like her, were avoiding both the English winter and their difficult families, chugging bottomless glasses of champagne in a hotel lacking genuine festive spirit. Whenever her married friends started giving her dating advice, a grown woman of 36, or tried to fix her up at parties with men they would never have considered for themselves, she reminded herself that she'd been to 10 out of 12 countries in Southeast Asia multiple times and had seen and experienced things that would have been impossible with children in tow. So whenever Amaka broke off in the middle of a conversation like a puppet, gawking at a nice butt and pulsing biceps or a shiny bag, or Lucy grieved over her latest failed date, it made the imminent payoff of Dara's investment in her career at one of the largest law firms in the world no less, even sweeter. One of the green players, it was hard to recognize his face from this distance, tried to dash across the field. He was brought crashing down by 3 men in red. All the girls I've met here complain about the English guys catching yellow fever, but the guy I've been seeing has been here 2 years and he's never even dated an Asian girl, Lucy boasted, reminiscing about her recent date. The trainee, who had only been in Singapore a month, looked confused at this bit of casual racism, but Dara stifled a smile, accustomed to the terrified insecurity of the English girls here. Most of the expats she knew were French, British, or American. The women mostly dated other French, British, or American expats, contracting their pool of dating options, while frustratingly, for them at least, the men did not. He moved out here with his now ex. They were engaged, but he said she missed home too much, which I completely understand. Lucy tilted over the trainee, shaking her curls in earnest. But nuking a relationship like that? Madness. I'd pack all this in the second there's a proposal. Are you kidding? So she went back to the UK, Dara asked, pressing 2 paracetamols into her palm. She had worked for 10 days straight and would have given anything to swap the warm cup of wine in her hand for an almond milk latte. Well, no, actually, yes or no. Total fluke. Andy said she met someone on the flight back and 6 months later they were married. They live in Sicily now, where the guy's from, and she's got one on the way, Lucy said ruefully. He told you all this? Dara stared at her suspiciously. She invited him to the wedding. Anyway, I still say it was a risky move. Dara couldn't hide a smile as she dug out a small battery-operated fan from her bag and switched it on. I see what you're saying. You've got your career, and all she's got is a ball in her stomach, lemons everywhere, and a bossy mother-in-law. The trainee barked a short laugh, and Lucy paused, unsure who the joke was on. Speaking of careers, Lucy smiled conspiratorially. Now that you've been given lead on the Nairobi case, it's only a matter of time, isn't it? As long as the case goes well, of course. Is that what everyone's been saying? Dara shrugged and swapped the fan over to her left side, pretending her heart hadn't skipped a beat. Secretly, she was pleased it was so obvious to everyone in the firm. The one area of her life she was truly confident about was her ability to work longer and harder and smarter than everyone else. It was what had earned her a scholarship to a private girls' school in St. Albans and got her through 3 lonely, uncomfortable years studying classics at Oxford, where she had never fitted in and couldn't afford the time and energy it took to try. Not for the first time, she wished she'd had some guidance along the way, someone to warn her that actual working life relied on so much more than intellect and being the smartest in the class. She'd have to figure it out on her own. second-guessing whether she'd been given an opportunity for the right or wrong reason, if she was being too pushy or not pushy enough, if she'd stroke the right ego the right way, or how she would be judged for caring about partnership above everything else. Finally, it seemed, everyone around her was starting to see Dara the way she saw herself, as the best senior associate in the firm. So that was an extract from the opening of my debut novel, In Such Tremendous Heat. My name is Kehinde Fadigbe, and I hope you enjoyed this reading.
Before we round up the show today, we want to pay tribute to one of our own, Oreoluwa Shonibare, who was the pioneer producer of Channel's book club. When it was just a dream, an idea, he took it from the scratch and helped to build it. And we will remain ever so grateful for such a talented, passionate gentleman. He was a great guy, and we will miss him. We pay tribute to Oreoluwa Shonibare, a colleague, a friend, a brother. May his soul rest in perfect peace. We'll miss him. We'll miss our friend, Oreoluwa Shonibare. Well, this is where we have to end the show today. As always, we'll be delighted to get your feedback through any of our social media platforms displayed on your screen. My name is Olakunle Kasumo. Remember, one great book can change your life. Bye-bye.